Hello and welcome to another lesson from Simply PE, and this topic in particular looking at the muscles in the body. Reminder with these presentations, the yellow text boxes are the tasks for students, the green text boxes are the note-taking sections for students, the blue text boxes are the differentiation tasks, and the red text boxes are the teaching and learning strategies and ideas for the practitioner. So in regards to this particular topic, the syllabus requires students to be able to identify the main muscles within the body. So you need to know about 13 type of muscles in the body. You also need to start to recognize key terminology within this particular topic. So we're going to be looking at tendons, ligaments and cartilage, but we're also going to be looking at other keywords involving muscle movement types, so things like flexion, extension and so on, and then from that hopefully we'll be able to start to apply some sporting examples to the different type of muscle movements. So without further ado, let's get going in this particular topic. So when we think of muscles, there are 13 muscles in the body that you're required to know for the GCSE syllabus, and they are here on the screen. So you might want to pause it, you might want to create a kind of sketch of the two sort of human figures that you can see there. If not, otherwise, if you can copy and paste maybe a blank diagram of the muscles within the body and you can start to label your diagram, that's worth doing as well. So before we look at the specific muscles and the type of movements that they're involved in, we need to recognize, and I'm going to keep on talking about this when we look at the muscles within the body, in that muscles work in pairs. Okay, so all muscles work in pairs, and they don't push. Okay, so muscles only pull. And if you remember back on the skeletal lessons, we looked at the skeleton providing a framework for the muscles, and we attach those muscles to the skeleton via tendons. Okay, and obviously when the muscles contract, when they pull at the bones, okay, that's what provides the movement that occurs. So ultimately, as it says there, the tendons attach muscles to bone, as we have talked about. Okay, ligaments on the other hand, they join bone to bone. Okay, so ligaments join bone to bone and tendons join muscles to bones. And then finally, in regards to the cartilage, okay, an example here, you'll find this within the knee joint. Okay, cartilage in essence is a bit like the shock absorbers within a car. Okay, so you think of a car going over a speed bump, for example, they'll have shock absorber springs within them, okay, to protect the wheels and the chassis, the main body of the car, okay, from causing damage by going over that bump. And cartilage is very similar in that sense. So these cover the ends of the bones, okay, and they provide a smooth and a frictionless free surface. Okay, so when we jump, when we move around, when we're kind of physically active, they're the shock absorbers. When we might jump in the air for a header or catching a ball, for example, in netball or basketball, okay, they'll take that impact to ensure that the bones don't rub against one another and they don't cause us any problems and discomfort. All right, so let's look at the types of movement at a joint, okay, and there are a few different types that I'm going to kind of whiz through, and then we're going to go through them in more detail in the specific muscles. So flexion and extension is the first two, okay, and you can see from the diagram examples of the different muscle movement types. When we think of flexion, okay, think of an angle, like in maths, okay, between the bones, and they're reducing, okay, so you get an example there is sort of the bicep curl, for example, and we can see the flexion stage is when we move our forearm, okay, towards our shoulder joint. And then the extension is when we straighten out our arm, okay, and that's increasing that angle between the bones. When we look at abduction and adduction, okay, so you can see in the diagrams here, we've got a blue line which is kind of going through straight, like an invisible blue line which goes straight through the body of a person in the middle. and ultimately the limbs that move away from the body, that's called abduction. And when we have limbs coming back towards that imaginary line, okay, towards the body, then we call that adduction. And I like to think of it, when we add something together, we're bringing it back towards the body, we're adding it towards that body. Okay, so that's the movement back towards that imaginary line. We've got rotations. This is turning at a limb against its long axis. So you can see the example there of the guy with the black shorts on. If you put imaginary line, okay, a bit like in table football, through his hip joints, okay, so horizontally, okay, then that rotation might cause him to do like a forward somersault or forward roll, okay, or a backward somersault. Okay, so that causes rotation at a long axis. And we've got circumduction, okay, and this is kind of the rotation that we find if we sort of just pick up your arm, for example, and you twist your wrist left and right. That is what we refer to as circumduction. Okay, so they're found at the ends of the body. And then finally, the last two, we've got plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. So plantar flexion is this movement at the ankle where the toes are pointed towards the ground. And then we've got dorsiflexion, okay, where we've got the toes that are pulled up towards the knee. So again, pause your video here, see if you can start to think of any examples of the sporting movements that happen within each of these kind of muscle movement types. Okay, so let's specifically look at the different muscles then. So if we look here then, on the right hand side, we've got the highlighted muscles, which I'll quickly whiz through. So deltoids, as you can see within the shoulder, they provide flexion and abduction, okay, at the shoulder. So flexion, when we raise our arm forward, okay, that would be flexion, okay, and that's used by the deltoids. And then when we move our arm outwards, okay, away from the body, then that would be abduction. And then we've got triceps, which obviously provide that extension at the elbow. So when we straighten the elbow, we straighten our arm. Okay, and ultimately we've got the bicep, which looks at providing flexion at the elbow. So where we close that angle within the elbow joint. As you go through each of these, you can pause your video here, try and think of a sporting example, try and think of the specific movement within the sport and which muscle is contracting, which muscle is working to cause that movement. I'll give you one example here for the first one in terms of deltoids. I'll use the example of handball in sport. The goalkeeper may be spreading out to save a shot, so he raises his arms in like a star shape position. And the deltoids are contracting, and there's obviously abduction there happening at the shoulder. For the rest of them, go through it and then we'll try and go through it with you in class as well. Okay, so let's move on to the next three. So we've got latimus dorsi here. You can see the top right. This is extension and abduction at the shoulder. We've got rotator cuffs. Okay, this is again abduction and rotation again at the shoulder. Pectorals, looking at adduction of the shoulder and of the arm. And then finally, the next three that we need to kind of specifically look at. We've got abdominals. This creates obviously flexion at the spinal cord. So when we do a sit-up crunch, okay, we're closing that angle, okay, within that kind of spinal cord. And then we've got the hip flexors, as it says there, it's providing support from a standing to sitting position. Okay, so when we're standing up, and then if you sit on a chair, for example, then that is provided through the use of the hip flexors, and it's also abduction at the hip. Okay, so like a straddle position, as you can see the performer is maybe using within gymnastics there. And then finally the gluteals. Okay, here we're looking at the back side, so the bum, and we've got, obviously it provides support from a sitting to standing position. So they're contracting when we're sitting down, and then when we stand up, okay, maybe just have a feel of your backside, your gluteus maximus, and actually see that and kind of feel that in action in terms of contracting. It's working. Okay, when we look at the hamstrings next, you can see that's the back of the legs there, really important part, especially for kind of invasive sports that require lots of running and lots of kicking, for example. That provides flexion at the knee, so that closing of the angle in regards to the knee joint. Quadriceps, Okay, these guys, you can see within the bottom right picture, 4 muscles within the thigh each. Okay, that's what quad comes from Latin. Okay, and this provides extension at the knee. Okay, so we're opening that angle within the knee joint. And then we've got the gastrocnemius. Okay, this is found kind of your calf muscle, so found at the back of the lower part of your leg. Okay, again, this provides plantar flexion at the ankles. Remember the toes pointing towards the ground. Okay, and then finally we've got the tibialis anterior. Okay, where this provides dorsiflexion at the ankles when we point our toes upwards towards the sky. Okay, and that's found kind of within at the front of your shin. So again, pause your video here and think about, out of these 4 muscles, which of these guys work in pairs? Okay, so can you pair them up together, and how do they work in pairs? Think about when one contracts, one should relax. Okay, so maybe just have a feel around your own muscles, okay, within your legs there, okay, to start to see how they work together. Use these muscles, these kind of sentence starters if you want to as well, to help you answer that question. Okay, so let's now try and put some of this in practice. So we've got the theory, now let's use some exam technique to try and answer these questions. So there's 5 questions there for you in terms of what is the specific joint, in terms of where the movement is occurring, what type of joint is this, and why, what muscles are in action, and look at picture 1 and 2. So it's been split into the left and to the right in regards to what movement type is occurring. Pause the video here and we'll come back with the answers. Okay, so the answers, there's twofold answers here. Most of you would have talked about the knee joint specifically, okay, but you could have also talked about the hip joint, but we'll go through that. So first of all, if we look at the yellow point, the yellow answers, okay, if we look at the knee joint, okay, we can see there that this is a hinge joint. Okay, and also, how do we know it's a hinge joint, and why is it a hinge joint? Because it allows flexion and extension only. The muscles working in order for that flexion at the knees, the closing of the angle, and then the opening of the angle, the extension, okay, is using the hamstring and the quadricep. They're the muscles that work together for this type of movement. And we can see in regards to the flexion at the knee on the left-hand side of the picture, the extension is on the right hand side of the picture. So once that angle has opened up again with the yellow dots, you should be able to see that. And then finally, in regards to the hip joint, you could have answered it through the hip joint. Okay, this again is a ball and socket type of joint. Okay, it allows flexion, it allows extension at the leg. And you could have mentioned about the fact that the 2 muscles they're working within the hip joint for that movement is the hip flexor and the gluteals. Okay, so the backside and excuse me, the hip flexor. And again, you've got the extension at the hip. Okay, so if we think of our femur, okay, we think of the fact that our upper leg would be extending backwards, okay, and then flexing as it comes through with that kicking of the rugby ball. Finally, have a go at this one here. I'm not going to read through the 5 questions. You can pause the video here. Look at the video in terms of the movement of what's happening within that type of joint. Okay, so hopefully you've come up with an answer. Okay, again, you would have mentioned here that the ankle joint is where we're looking at specifically. We're looking at the muscles that are being used, the gastrocnemius and the tibialis anterior. We're looking at the gastrocnemius, again, is the one that's contracting. Okay, try and do that movement perhaps on the floor and then feel the back of your leg, okay, your calf, your gastrocnemius, and you should be able to feel that tensing, okay, as you point your toes towards the ground. And ultimately, this type of movement is plantar flexion, and a good example in terms of sport that we could have talked about here is, think of the seat drop, for example, in trampolining, and we point those toes forwards, okay, when we get into that seat drop position. So that would have been a really good example to use there as well. Finally, for the teaching and learning strategies for the practitioners, obviously go through some different scenarios. So make sure you provide lots of different sporting examples for students to explore in the muscle groups and so on. Use pictures and demos. So use your students to get up to the front, to look at pictures, to see what's going on, and provide that application for AO1 and AO2.